Welcome to the next episode of the Healthy Helix. I'm so delighted to be here today with you with Nancy White, my co-host, and a special guest that she'll introduce shortly. At Healthy Helix, we're here to help you look at preventative health and things that are affecting us every day in our society. And right now, as we've been through this incredible lockdown, COVID has really played a role in mental health. And so we want to spend this episode really talking about mental health, and particularly from the perspective of our kids and in school and in university and elsewhere. And so we have an expert with us to share more about that. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Nancy, to please introduce Don Wright, our special guest.
Thanks so much, Lois, and it's great to see you. I'm happy to be here with you both today. And yes, we have Don Wright, the CEO of Clarigent Health, joining us today. Don has a fascinating company and technology that really leverages the power of artificial intelligence, and he's going to tell us more about that. In addition to his role at Clarigent Health, I'm very fortunate to have him as the chairman of my board of directors at Inagene, and Don is no stranger to the world of pharmacogenetics. He previously was founder and CEO of Assurex Health, again, an innovative company and pioneer in the space of pharmacogenetics and mental health. And Don was really fortunate and had a successful exit back in 2016 of that company. So we're grateful to have your experience helping lead us at Inagene. And we're really looking forward to hearing more about your new company, Clarigent Health. So thanks for being here, Don.
Well, thank you both for having me.
So, Don, you have made this move into mental health. You've been in pharmacogenetics and elsewhere. Tell us a little bit about Clarigent and why and how you got into this business.
So Clarigent is focused on vocal biomarkers in the mental health space. So vocal biomarkers mean machine learned artificial intelligence listening in and helping professionals, medical professionals, determine whether somebody has depression, anxiety, and kind of more importantly, if they're moving towards crisis and self-harm or a suicide attempt. So things like acoustics, how the person is speaking, how fast they're speaking, how breathy, and then a number of linguistic characteristics around things that people say and that indicates that there is depression. It's all things that, some things that doctors know, it's some things that machine learning has uncovered. And really it just helps doctors both monitor and screen patients for mental health problems.
Well, that's fantastic. So, what are both of you seeing in the market right now? What is happening in the whole realm of mental health? So Nancy, I know you and I have touched on this before. Tell me what you're seeing in terms of mental health going on in our environment.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lois. And for any person who regularly checks their news feed, more and more every day, stories about mental health and the implications of the pandemic on mental health are making the front news headlines. We just saw recently that in Japan, where suicide often has a very high prevalence and incidence, they are experiencing record levels of new suicide. And again, this is a fallout from a lot of the implications of the pandemic. Not only are there fears around catching the virus, but when you compound that with loneliness, anxiety, panic, it's understanding how people can find themselves in a situation where they may feel a loss of support or connection with others in our society. So we have seen an increase in the number of individuals and companies wanting to partner with us because, as you know, our technology, we have a panel that is very deeply focused in the areas of pain and mental health and the pharmaceutical interventions that can support individuals that may need the use of a medication to help them with their management. So we pivoted during COVID to really put an emphasis on making sure we were providing the right information for individuals seeking more detail about how pharmacogenetics can support them, but also, and really important, critically important, helping them find that right medication that will work for them, again, based on their own DNA and how their body will process that medication. So we really focus around that angle of if you need an intervention, such as a medication, to help you manage any of these symptoms you might be feeling or conditions that you may be experiencing. And the response has been overwhelming. We are seeing an increase in interest and questions arising about this technology. Don, what has your experience been through this period in COVID?
Well, and you know me, Nancy, I speak pretty bluntly, right? I mean, certainly in the United States, I'm in the United States, you're in Canada. I know that the percentages and those types of things are very similar between the two countries. Prior to the pandemic, I would say that at best we were starting to work towards solutions finally after decades and decades of ignoring mental health from both a research perspective and from a treatment perspective. In the United States, until the Affordable Care Act, it was almost impossible even to get your employer benefits to pay for going to a psychiatrist or to a psychologist. So what we have seen is unbelievably worse numbers. So if we just want to talk about for a minute, statistics, and I won't bore you with all the numbers, but I can tell you, the gold standard in the United States statistic for how many people were affected by a mental health condition in a way that it caused a problem with their work or their school or their relationship has historically been 1 in 5 a year and in 1 in 4 prevalence in a lifetime. CDC is saying in adults it's 1 in 2 right now, right? And that 40 to 50% of high school age children have considered suicide during the pandemic. So the numbers, and there's a little bit of a danger. I'll talk about the bad first. We went in the United States from ignoring mental health to making it our number 1 priority to almost instantly making it our number 2 priority behind opioid crisis, right? And then the pandemic hit and it was almost impossible to get resources for anything but the pandemic. And rightfully so, except, obviously the pandemic was the acute problem in our face, but the downstream implications of taking kids out of school, especially when we had finally built a situation where in many schools there were therapists, there were multiple therapists to help kids. They didn't have to take the kids out of school to get them to a doctor. They came to the schools. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit. Our company had 15 different school districts that were in the process of implementing. And in a single day, our governor closed our schools and every one of those kids lost access to the therapist until they figured out how to do telemedicine. On that day, it was still illegal in Ohio to do a first mental health assessment over telemedicine. In most states, it was illegal to talk to a doctor that wasn't in the state you're in over telemedicine. And so one of the good things that happened during the pandemic is that executive orders were put in place all across the United States to allow that to happen. So all of a sudden, we were able to help kids and adults, talking to them as therapists, just like we're talking right now. And I think what we figured out over the last year is that you can successfully have a therapy session over a Zoom call almost as easily. In some cases, even easier. Sometimes people actually are more comfortable talking like this than they are talking in person with somebody. So there's a few good things, but the numbers are horrible. 1 in 2, 40, 50 or 55% of adults considering suicide. We are a social creature, right? Humans are social people. And, we can all talk about how great it is if you're a hermit that you don't have to go out in society right now, but the vast majority of people are not hermits, right? So, I found it myself. When we were closed down for about 6 months, we weren't allowed to go into the office. I eventually just had to start going to the hardware store and making eye contact with people and stuff because, I have cats and eventually they get tired of me.
Well, I think you raised some really great points there, Don. So I think the wonderful news is that there is transformational things happening in health through telehealth. And really, I even look at, my son who's now doing his sessions on Zoom, and he's way more comfortable about that because so many of these kids do have social anxiety. And so really, I do think that's going to be really a transformational change in creating more accessibility for health. But it's interesting. You're also talking about students. I'm interested in this age group of 18 to 24. They seem to have a particular impact in terms of mental health. What makes this group particularly vulnerable, or are they as vulnerable now? Is there just more that are vulnerable? So maybe talk a little bit about some of what you're seeing in some of the university students in particular, which I think where you focused some of your work previously or primarily.
Yeah. So, well, university kids, even before the pandemic, right? I mean, they actually, some aspects of the pandemic could help. So I have a daughter who is mildly autistic. She's in college. She made Dean's List last semester. She said it was the greatest semester she ever had, right? Because she didn't have to go on campus and didn't have to be around people. So, but again, she's that, that small minority. Um, it's interesting. Before the pandemic, ignoring anything going on with the pandemic, you had kids who were going away from their parents, maybe for the first time, an age group that, especially in boys, not willing to admit that they miss their family or they miss their friends, right? In many ways, not willing to seek out services, and universities were a little bit at fault because they didn't make the services easy to seek out without having to like walk into the mental depression center on campus or something. And a lot of people have told us that the Zoom calls actually help with that because they can call into that center from their dorm room or from their home, and they don't have to walk in because they still feel the stigma. But there, and you had athletes. I think it's always interesting to put these things in perspective. You have athletes who get recruited into a Division I school, right? And they have never lost a swim meet in their life or never lost a football game in their life, right? Because they were the best in the city that they grew up in. And now they're playing against everyone who was the best in the city that they grew up in. And so they lose a match, they fail a test, they haven't failed a test in their life, right? And their boyfriend or girlfriend, who was, going to be their boyfriend or girlfriend forever, and they were going to make it work even though they were going to different colleges, hasn't texted them back in 3 days. And they miss their parents, and they feel like they're the only ones who feel this way, even though we know that almost every single person on that campus feels that way, right? And it's always the, that I had a very smart, one of the founding inventors of the Surex technology tell me one day, and he was using the holidays as an example, but the holidays are kind of the worst time for people because they know for a fact, because they see it, because everybody looks so happy, that everybody else is happy and they aren't, which is of course in no way true, right? And the college kids think the same thing. And now you added on, student debt is skyrocketing, especially in the United States. Jobs, we were in a situation where unemployment was almost gone in the United States before the pandemic, and now it's of course skyrocketed to huge numbers. And so even if they graduate, are they going to be able to find a job? Or are they just going to move back in with their parents? It's a terrifying time without a pandemic for a lot of people. And then we added on, people around you may literally die. You can't go and hang out with your friends because you get in trouble, and we may not have a job, and you may owe a ton of money. So so suicide is the number 2 reason for death in that age group in the United States, and the only thing in number 1 is accidents, right? So it's not in any way a good statistical. I can't emphasize enough. We are going to lose so many people to either suicide. I mean, suicide obviously is the worst possible outcome, but severe depression and severe anxiety and those things not getting treatment messes up every aspect of your life. And there's always been that problem with mental health because the onset of those diseases happen, 50% of people before the age of 14 and 75% of people before the age of 23 or something. And they last your whole life, right? So it's not like later in life you get cancer, you go to an oncologist and you either get better or you don't. I mean, it's an acute period of time, but mental health affects your life all throughout the productive part of your life.
So let's look at what are some of the solutions on this. So, Nancy, you're supporting people all the time. And, there we're seeing more and more younger people and others going into medication. What solutions are there from your perspective?
Yeah, first, I just have to state my shock over those statistics, Dawn. I think that those are incredibly troubling to hear. And it's exciting to know that there are companies like our three that are offering, support, solution, and tools. And when we think about that age of individual within the university setting, one of the key observations we've made in terms of pharmacogenetics and the research we're doing around that is the millennial age group and younger, they're more open about at least talking about issues and also considering taking a medication. And again, the power of a pharmacogenetic test where this can become very invaluable for a first-time user of this medication. There's a lot of data out there that suggests that if you have a bad experience with a medication like an antidepressant the first time, and then you try a second one, your response rate diminishes the more trials you have. But in addition to that, you have to think about the consequences of that hope of getting better by taking that pill. And then if you take something that your body just does not process and isn't going to work for you, you can imagine how that downward spiral can escalate and in fact worsen a situation. So we're actually working with a pharmacy. This is very much in its stage of infancy, but they operate a pharmacy on a university campus. And we want to evaluate whether having access to something like a test like this to help you get to that medication sooner, if it helps in that patient journey in terms of their identification of a need to get some assistance, and whether or not knowing which medication will or won't work for them has any impact on how they're feeling and getting better, and also their willingness to use the medication. But Dawn, I'm most interested in understanding how the technology you have at Clarigent is really working to further the science in this area, but identifying, markers and signs. And so can you explain to us how your technology works?
Yeah, sure. Well, and I will say, if you think about Inagene and what you're doing, and Clarigent and what we're doing, we're very complementary products, especially in mental health, right? Because what we're doing is all on the helping doctors figure out what's going on with that patient side, right? Whereas what you're doing is, if for mental health anyway, if you know you have an issue, if your physician knows you have an issue, you're helping figure out which treatment is going to work best for that patient, right? And so so again, like I said before, we're vocal biomarkers. So we have a very simple. It can be done with everything we do is clinician to patient, right? So you can't download us from the App Store and use it yourself. It's all about helping physicians figure out what is going on with their patients, and monitoring those patients in other places for the benefit of helping with the doctor diagnose and those types of things, right? So the first use of the product was an app that the doctor had, and literally they just put a tablet or a phone between them and their patient, and they talk to them for a few minutes and get them talking about some emotional things. The pandemic sped up our telehealth dramatically. We did not have telehealth on the day the shutdowns started, so we immediately pivoted and can now work with any telemedicine. It's actually a much less, because it's kind of interesting, because we did all of our clinical trials on trying to figure out things. First, does the technology work? Once you prove that, now can you introduce it to a therapeutic session without changing the dynamic? If I put a phone between you and me, will it change the way we speak to each other? Right. And then once telehealth actually became, something that was more of a norm, now it's just running in the background on the telehealth session and listening in as the doctor speaking to their patient. Their patient knows. I mean, it's not a hidden thing, and it scores for the doctor what's going on. And the more times they meet with that patient, the more of a baseline, and how the patient's going off of that baseline can be determined. And then, of course, it's AI and machine learning. So there's a whole lot of other things we can help with. And especially for agency uses and things like working in schools or universities, we can help them understand what's going on with their entire population, what's going on with females versus males, are freshmen freaked out and get worse, or are freshmen okay and then it gets worse after you've been on campus? With some of our customers who are using it in kind of high school and younger settings, they can look at different high schools. Are all fifth grade boys in greater Cincinnati having a problem, or is it just inner city, or is it in the suburbs, or do they have enough resources at certain schools? Sometimes what has happened in the past is it's all just very, let's get together every Tuesday and talk about what's going on across all the schools. And that's clearly not the best way to figure out if you have enough resources at, Deer Park Elementary versus Indian Hill High School, right? And you can quickly adjust those things and put alerts in place and things like that. So that's what we do. What we're working on. We also have the ability. We have customers using it in hospital settings, both screening. So when a patient comes into the ED, are they suicidal in addition to whatever other reason they're there? Do we need to keep them, or can we get them an outpatient appointment? What's really interesting is some of our users are starting to use it at the back end. So they're starting to use it to show that a patient has improved enough that they can give up their slot to somebody else who needs it and be treated in a different way. And that's I think a problem, I say it in, Cincinnati, Ohio, where I am, has a pretty decent amount of, compared to other places, we have a pretty good amount of resources available for mental health. It's still not, but it's still, if you find out right now that your kid needs help, the two major places you would take them in Cincinnati average a 6-month wait list. And so that's good compared to other parts in the United States. But the problem is, once you get your kid in there, there's really no plan to ever get them out. Right. I mean, and so I say to my own personal physician all the time, I'm like, has it ever crossed your mind that I might not need to come anymore? Right. I mean, it's great that I come, I get help from it, but aren't there other people who are more acute and they're waiting 6 months or 9 months to get in? And maybe I should be only seeing you every 6 months. And maybe the tool can say that because I'm down below some line. And what's nice about it is, as we start to integrate it into other technologies with people's permission, it can alert the doctor that, okay, you put Don now on a 6-month plan, but Don's not doing well, after 3 months, maybe it's time to pull him back in, and those types of things.
Yeah, that sounds like a really powerful resource for a healthcare professional to actually have measurement on the progress or some of the warning signs.
Because they really don't, just to be clear. I mean, in mental health, even though we have scales, most doctors don't use the scales, or they only use them at the beginning, right? To do okay, now I know you have depression. I always think of, we finally figured out autism is a spectrum disease, right? Well, mental health is a spectrum disease too, right? Nobody just has depression and now we should go, help them with depression. Depression causes anxiety, causes, inability to sleep, causes people to gain weight, it's all interconnected. And so the fact that you would think that you do a screening and you're still helping that person 3 years later, and you've done no other kind of an analysis on them to see where they really are, is absurd, right? I mean, every time you go to the doctor for your physical, they don't say, oh, I checked your heart last time, so I don't need to do that anymore. Now we'll start with the lungs, right? I mean, they check everything again, right? And we don't do that in mental health. So.
Well, and what you raised some interesting points, which leads me to ask Lois a question. So as Dawn's talking about, sleep and how we feel, and so many other peripheral things that, impact in our daily lives, I think about, nutrigenomics and the work that dnaPower is doing. So having listened to some of this conversation, Lois, I'm very curious to hear about your thoughts around the power of some of the tools that you have.
Well, I think, all the things you raised are so important. And the thing is, if you or someone in your family is suffering from mental health issues, what do you do? Where do you start? And I think that the great thing is that some of the easiest steps to start with start at home. And, once you've already fallen into depression, it makes it harder to look at some of the lifestyle elements, but it's still, if your family around them, anything that you can do to support diet, exercise, sleep, stress, and overall mental wellness just in their environment, it makes such a difference. We now know that your epigenetics and your lifestyle is what triggers tells your DNA how to express itself. And so the more you can add positive factors in, the more your genetics will express themselves positively, and it does have an impact on mental health. There's many studies that show, eating, if you can improve the diet of somebody who's suffering from mental health, it helps to improve how they're feeling. If you can get them some exercise, all of these things help change the chemicals in the brain and the neurotransmitters, and it just allows everything to function more freely. Once you're in depression, that stagnation sometimes sets in. But it's, again, if you are someone with mental health or you have someone in your family, look at a good diet. Think about what you can be eating in order to stimulate the right chemical reactions in your body. Get a little bit of exercise. Sleep is absolutely critical to the repairing of the brain and clearing out the plaques at night. And so getting more rest and sleep, that's why often people who are depressed do need to sleep more. It's just harder to clear out the brain. And again, exercise and that can help it. And of course, speaking and going in for some support from your health practitioner, being able to read in the voice if somebody is getting to a very suicidal place, and knowing that if we can just get sometimes people over a hurdle, it does make a big difference. And so, and from my perspective, I can't emphasize enough how important diet is. And if you have foods that trigger your body negatively into inflammation, your gut speaks to your brain and impacts the depression. So if you can know what foods are right for your body, which is nutrigenomics, you can now set your body up to be working with you as opposed to against you. And so, that's why we love when people do the DNA testing for diet and lifestyle, because they find 3, 4, 5 foods and vitamins that their body might not be managing all that well, that they either need, to take some foods out of their diet, add some nutrition and some vitamins in, it can make a huge difference. And so I'll just, close on that by saying also take vitamins. Vitamins are just super. We aren't getting the amount of nutrition we should through our diet. And we do know that taking vitamins can help people who are starting to have troubles in balance with their body. So, hugely important, many things that people can take leading up to that. And we just, love to see that happen. So is there anything that either of you would like to add, in terms of how people can be responding and managing mental health in a better way?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll start because I'll share my own personal experience in that, I think I hit a COVID wall of fatigue last month. And I was just, I'm fed up with Zoom. I'm fed up with not seeing people. I was eating some crappy foods that under normal circumstances, I wouldn't normally put into my body. And I just woke up one morning, I was like, enough. I can't do this anymore. And I feel like a new person. I don't want to overestimate how I'm feeling, but by just taking better care of myself and getting sleep, putting the right things in my body, taking the right vitamins. I've done the dnaPower test, and I can attest it's an incredibly powerful tool. And I sat down one afternoon and went through it again to just reset myself. And I'm feeling better. It helps too that we're now headed into spring and there's more daylight hours. So I'm really excited about that. But with the whole digitalization of healthcare, which for me, that's one of the silver linings of the pandemic. I've spent my entire career working in the health industry, most of it for big pharmaceutical companies. And a lot of big pharma companies like to claim that they were innovative and digitally innovative. Not the case, but I would say a silver lining is that acceptance of the technology, the acceleration of the adoption of new tools and means of doing business has really catapulted, I know, our own company's success, but also exposures of others to these great tools. And as we think about, the school year for a lot of the students, which we've been focused on speaking about today, it's winding down for this school year, but we have a whole new school year ahead of us. And there again seems to be that light at the end of the tunnel as vaccinations for adults anyway, anyone over the age of 16 are becoming available. But I think that we should really think forward to what are going to be some of the challenges for reintegration, if you will, back to that in-person, in-classroom setting. And we talked a lot about the 18 to 24-year-old today, but I'm the mother of a teenager at the age of 15. And one of the concerns I have for them going back to school is that, they've spent a whole year virtual, no human interaction, no teacher putting pressure on them in the classroom in terms of, shame for not handing an assignment in on time, or all of those other intricacies of growing up and exposure to the real world, if you will. I think that we still have a rocky road ahead of us, and there are going to be a lot of concerns facing families as everyone kind of gets ready to reemerge into that face-to-face interaction again. I'm curious, Don, about your thoughts on that and the work that your team is doing.
Well, my head is swimming right now because I agree with everything both of you just said, and I want to emphasize it all. And I know I'm going to forget things, but a few things I would say before I talk about my product. It's fascinating to me as a person of science who is around scientists all day, and it's disgusting to me as a person who has children and friends and that are struggling and whatever, that most of what you guys just talked about, we've known from a research perspective forever, right? You have to eat well to be well. And we attribute that into how you would feel better physically, and we have ignored it mentally forever. But even with the physical part, we still pretty much ignored it, right? I mean, your doctor says to you, you should eat better, and you say, sure, of course I should, right? But we, from a mental health perspective, we've known for decades that the only thing that shows significant improvement in patients is better exercise and better taking care of themselves through how they eat, right? So take care of yourself. And it sounds dumb, and you want to find this silver bullet, but the reality is you can start with just simple things, and so I coach high school soccer, right? And so one of the things I talk about all the time is my kid, we did a winter season this year, and I pulled all my kids into it, called all the soccer moms and said, I'm coaching your sons this winter because they can't just sit at home. We're going to go do something. Right. And I think that our technology, today, because it's where the most acute issues are, and it's the path of least resistance to get this technology used in important places. We're looking at crisis. We were looking at crisis first. Now we're looking at depression and anxiety, but we were also looking at bad places. So the technology was originally developed in the emergency department for triage, and we all know that's an important place for it to be, but it's not where you solve the problem. It's where you stop the person from killing themselves, right? And so you ultimately want to be in a place where you catch it early enough that you can do things that make sure you never end up in the emergency department, right? And so if you can know ahead of time the makeup of your body, how you metabolize things. I mean, these are just science, right? I mean, this isn't, I still read articles today that people, researchers talk about there's not enough research into pharmacogenomics or what you're doing with food. And I look at it and I say, well, Assurex has tested over 2 million people, right? And people stop me at conventions and at conferences and say, oh my gosh, I got this for my daughter, and instantly, or in 2 weeks, she was better. I mean, all you have to do is get them off what we call the red medications, right? The medications that won't work for you. It's the same thing. And I'm not an expert, Lois, but I mean, don't eat the bad things, right? Don't eat the things that are going to make you worse. Don't take the medications that are going to make you worse. But if you know if you know that information ahead of time, and kind of the trajectory of the person ahead of time, it could be as simple as convince them to play youth soccer and get them good nutrition. And good nutrition isn't just, you can't make a poster for nutrition. I mean, we all know the food pyramid was wrong when we were growing up, but you can't, even today with what we know about nutrition, you can't make a poster for nutrition and say that's what everybody should eat, right? Because people, I mean, in a very simple answer to that question, it's like, well, people who grew up in Asia versus people who grew up in Europe versus people who grew up in Africa and the United States have completely different mechanisms for how they digest things and how they turn that into what it needs to be turned into in the body. How could you possibly just generically say milk is good or milk is bad, right? It's just not true. And How could you say this person, is gonna be a soccer star, so that's gonna make their mental health well, when maybe they want to do art, or but if you can figure that out early on, then those people don't end up, in an inpatient mental health facility, which, by the way, is where no one gets better. It's where you get stabilized and then you get dumped back out into all the pressures and all the stressors and everything else that was happening to you before. And nobody told you to eat well, and nobody did a pharmacogenetic test. So they put you on, Lexapro, and you need Prozac or whatever. And so we just, the fact that mental health and everything around it, behavioral health, all those types of things, are so far behind in technology. It's why bringing science to mental health is our tagline, because we just really believe that. I mean, we don't set an arm without taking an X-ray. We don't not do an MRI on a knee and just say, well, I just think I'm going to go in and fix the ligament, right? Why would you not want to know? And it's so simple. I mean, especially like ours is hard because it's a little more, it's actually technology listening in, and there's all kinds of nuances to what we do and trying to get it right when you're doing it over a phone or whatever. But the science of like understanding how you're going to metabolize a medication or a food, or a vitamin that's put into your body has been around forever. I mean, to your point, the pharma companies have known this for multiple decades. It's why they created Lexapro after Prozac, because they figured out that anybody who had a 2D6 problem wasn't going to do Prozac right. And 45% of white males in the United States are normal on 2D6. So 55% aren't going to process it normally, right? So they've known forever. They use it to develop their drugs, but they didn't give the information out to help people take the right drug. And so we've been allowing this for too long. And the nice thing, like you said before about millennials, they, unlike my parents, don't think that their doctor knows everything, right? So they're willing to research it themselves. They're willing to go get another opinion. They're willing to try things. So if we can push hard there, to get them to understand that really maybe all they need to do is change what they're eating, or get off of one of the medications they're on, or play soccer or whatever, maybe we slow down this, and turn it around.
Well, thank you. You're so right about that, Don. And so thank you. You've really summarized so many of the points. I think as we move forward, there's just going to be, I don't think we've even hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of the impacts we're going to see coming out of the pandemic, in terms of the isolation, the depression, and the impacts on people. It is an opportunity for people to focus on their health, as opposed to sometimes we get down, as you were saying, Nancy, and head in the other direction. But I think what we want to do is just encourage anyone listening to this is, really step up early in terms of mental health. Starting point is looking after your food and your lifestyle, your diet. If you have, you're going to be or need to take medications, check out. We've got the science now to make this work. So find the science that helps you learn how to eat, the science that helps you with the medications that are right for you. And if you're in crisis, go to your doctor, and they've got the science tools like yours, Don, that can help people really understand if we're at a crisis point with it. So any final comments? We'll close off here. Any last words of advice you want to offer to people before we sign off? Nancy?
Thanks, Lois, and thank you, Don. It's always great to reconnect and catch up with you both. I think that, you've summarized it very eloquently, Lois. For anyone who is looking for more information, we have our websites listed down below. You can certainly go there for more info, or feel free to reach out to us at our email address, also listed here, with any questions you might have, and we can certainly pass on any questions you might have for Don. Don, do you want to take us home for the end of this podcast?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess my final thought would be nothing to do with technology. Honestly, it would be the single best way to help somebody in crisis is to reach out to them. The single best way to find out if somebody is hurting is to ask them. The studies show that the best way to make sure somebody's taking their medication is ask them each day if they're taking it. I mean, it's truly that simple sometimes. And the compassion and empathy that we need to show for our friends. I mean, if if you knew that your friend was having chest pains, you would advise them to go to the emergency department, right? If we have, and I'll end it with this. We have a thing we do at Clarigent every day. People use "How are you doing?" as "Hi," "Hello," right? When we ask somebody how they're doing and they say, "Good, how are you?" we say, "No, really, I'm actually interested. How are you doing?" And it changes the conversation, right? And and of course we're a healthcare company, so it's easy to do that. But it should be easy if it's your friend. How is it not okay to ask them if they're okay? And sometimes that's all it takes to solve a problem or to get them on the right track. So, just care about other people.
Well, thank you, Don. And let's be sure we're really asking people how they truly are in the coming weeks ahead. Thank you both, and wishing everybody to take good power over their health.